It also indicates that past life experiences is an explanation for strange behaviors such as untenable fear and phobias. When these reactions emerge in everyday life, it can lead to serious emotional and physical distress and interfere with normal functioning. Some people don't remember their dreams, while others can have one dream recurring throughout their lives. It is important to remember that there are many different levels and kinds of dreams. There is also something called pan-native dreaming. Indigenous populations have always had a distinct awareness of dreaming, its purpose, its meaning, and function. Most Indigenous people believe and follow a different dream discourse compared to the European, as many believe in the powers of dreams influencing their real life. The notion of dream healing ranges from cures for the ill or the healing of soul wounds or healing of the earth, which is represented by ecological vigilance. Dreams also serve as a narrative tool to portray the continued existence of the collision between indigenous and Western worlds. These dreams often liberate the dreamer from feelings of guilt, shame, internalized colonial self-perceptions that are shaped by destructive self-destructive anger, hatred, and enable the process of transforming suffering and pain into a chance for healing. The wounds linger on in the souls of the descendants that suffered these traumas. Historical trauma affects large populations and is more complicated than individual trauma. Historical trauma causes great loss of identity and affects generations until it becomes ingrained in the community. These passing on of traumatic events include stolen land, slavery, denial of education, forced breeding, forced assimilation, forced sterilization, the banning of cultural practices, physical abuse, sexual abuse, violence, broken and coerced peace treaties, residential schools, epidemics and diseases. Despite the forceful imposition of the European version of the Christian religion on Indigenous people, and with that, the insistence that religion is spiritual, Indigenous people remain deeply spiritual and believe that the spiritual person has an authentic sense that life has meaning and that one's existence has a purpose. The spiritual person feels a sense of responsibility that they have a mission to accomplish. The spiritual person believes that the sacred is in the ordinary. All life is sacred and experiences a sense of reverence and wonder in the everyday setting. The spiritual person appreciates the material but does not seek satisfaction from them. The spiritual person is affected by the pain and suffering of others. The spiritual person is committed to the betterment of the whole world and to the realization of the positive potential of all aspects of life. The spiritual person is deeply aware of human suffering, pain, and death, and the tragic realities of human existence. The spiritual person is one whose spirituality has borne fruit through being more peaceful, loving, and joyous, and that their spirituality has an impact on relationships to self, others, and nature. More importantly, spirituality is concerned with life's problems from a higher, enlightened, synthetic point of view, testing everything on the basis of values. The devastating truth of genocide, loss of culture, and forced removal from family and culture has become unresolved baggage. If trauma is not adequately dealt with in one generation, it gets passed down in our thought systems and behaviors. For example, if you want to heal children, you have to heal yourself and break the cycle. But first, you need to understand your own personal trauma. Our responses as Indigenous people to trauma is extremely rational and to be expected. They include survivor guilt, PTSD, psychic numbing, fixation on trauma, low self-esteem, anger, suicide, hypervigilance, intense fear, death identity, trauma and death obsession, dreams and massacres, loyalty to ancestral suffering, internalization of ancestral suffering, and betrayal of the ancestors. Nightmares and night terrors, memory loss, psychic numbing, hypervigilance, unresolved grief, and substance abuse is often diagnosed by the European as European conditions. It has been established scientifically that traumatic events, whether that of an individual or the collective, is passed on to subsequent generations, creating depression and anxiety. There are now studies underway to investigate how to recognize intergenerational trauma and the mechanisms of transmission, albeit by experts whose ancestors caused and inflicted this trauma and don't have the lived experience to measure it by. Psychological trauma is an emotional state of discomfort and stress resulting from memories of catastrophic events which shatter the survivor's sense of security. People subjected to prolonged, repeated trauma develop insidious, progressive forms of post-traumatic stress disorder that invades and erodes the personality. These concepts all present the idea that if trauma is not dealt with in previous generations, it will be dealt with in subsequent generations. Not only is trauma passed on intergenerationally, but also cumulatively. Therefore, intergenerational unresolved trauma becomes more severe each time it is passed on to subsequent generations. I suffered from dreams and nightmares since very early childhood. I have on occasion taken medication